Alright, what's up guys? Last video saw me assemble the 2J and now we have it back in the car. Didn't really film that. Pretty straightforward of putting an engine back in. I did the clutch and trans already. It's already on. Didn't have many hands. Needed a little help aligning everything. Drive shaft is on. So now it's just hooking up all the wiring, which on this side, and on like the manifolds and stuff. I still have waiting on the turbo to come back from rebuild, but this is a panic harness with a Link Fury X ECU. This being an NAT JZ, we're just using oil feed off the housing here, and then it is a oil fed only turbo, so then we only have our drain that goes down there, which you'll see what we are running when we get back into it. So I'll basically show you the intake manifold setup, how we had to modify that to fit in this chassis, and just where to hook up all your sensors at. Alright, so we'll just start here on this side. Basically you just want to route everything to where it gives you enough length when everything's set up. The injectors is the main part for this one, just because of how tight it gets. I have to run these through the runners on both sides. Same with the cam sensor, just because of the lengths of everything. But you just want to make sure like your TPS and IET are where you want them. You plug in your AC down there, and then you just have sensor here, here, and then your knock sensors on each side. Your starter gets plugged in down here. And if you have any auxiliary sensors like oil pressure sensor, fuel pressure sensor here, and then if you want to follow up, you have your VVT, and that comes over here. You have your crank sensor here and boost solenoid here. I have that mounted on the side of the block. So you just want to make sure not to forget anything if you're constrained on space, because with the manifold off, it's easier to get in. I have a injector sub harness here, or coil sub harness here, that gets plugged in. There's a ground here, and then there's a wideband that goes down here as well, and I have the plug over on this side. So you just kind of bring it through the back and tuck it as best as you can, and sort of put it back there. But the manifold covers up everything, so it's not worried about tucking or anything. It's more for serviceability as it's a drift car. So we'll get the last couple things plugged in. Alright, so here's the manifold setup. I had put an IAC on there, but it needed a check valve, so I deleted that. But we have our map sensor here, but the main part that matters is how you have to cut it to fit in the chassis. Otherwise, these eBay manifolds have a little bump on the end, and it will foul against the firewall there. So you have to cut it angled. As long as you're within the last runner, it fits pretty fine. And then the other thing, for 1J, you only have to move the fuse box here, but when you go 2J, you cannot fit it properly. So you have to leave it unbolted, and then also chop off this whole ear section here. Otherwise you will not be able to fit everything in there. So everything's all hooked up. Here's our flex fuel sensor setup as well. It's kind of hidden there, but just a basic rundown of fitting everything in there. Alright, so this is the setup of how I kind of route all my injector clips. This goes through runner 2 and 3, and these ones all came through 4 and 5, but then I had the cam sensor come in here just because it's a little tighter with all the harness wrapping. So do that, and then this is where the fuse box notch comes in. You can see it barely clears it right there and there, and you kind of go over this and push it in there. And then there's this little leg as well. Gotta move stuff around, but it all pretty much pushes into place. It's very tight. Might need a second hand to get it properly, but that's the basic idea of that. I'll get that done off camera real quick, and then grab the fuel rail to get that situated. Alright, now the injectors are all on. You can see how I routed all that, like I was saying. This fuel line is on, that goes to the regulator, that's the return. And then we have this line here. I have it capped just because this ends up lower level than the fuel tank. So without a cap, it will siphon all out of the tank. Also, if you have this set up, you do have to mill off, I think it was like a ½ inch off the end of the rail here with the 2J, or else you can't get this little 90 fitting on there. The 1J fit fine because it was lower in the car, but once it raised up another inch because of the higher deck height, you just had to make that modification. And I just have to run my brake booster line under there as well once I hook this up, and the fuel pressure regulator vacuum hose. So that's all under the manifold where I showed you guys the map sensor and those two fittings. Alright, next we're getting on our throttle body. I have a big 90 welded on this to go from 4" to 3" with our HG quick release on there. You want to make sure your O-ring gets on the manifold first, and then you're just going to put it in place. I have to grab the other bolts, but it's easier if you plug in your sensors beforehand, so that's why earlier we set those into the corner. So we'll get that set up, and that is going to be 4 of these socket cap bolts. I believe these are 5 or 6 millimeter. I'll have to check again, but they're around there for what comes at this kit. And pretty simple. I leave my power steering reservoir a little loose to move it around to get the bottom bolts, as they're a little harder to get to. Alright, so our throttle's on. Now we're going to take our bolt, and if you put this in this upper spot, it contacts the hood, so it kind of put it in this lower portion, and then you get hood clearance. So I just gotta wiggle this around and not drop the bolt. But you just have to make sure your lower power steering suction line clears your AC line if you have it. And then once you get it all in there, it's obviously easier with 2 hands as anything is. Like, get your bolt started, position it where you want, and there you go. So now your intake side is set. Set to mount radiator, intercooler, and make our way to the exhaust side. Alright, next is your belt system. So this is the routing for if you have power steering and AC. The trick is go around all of them on the outside, pull your slack up here, and then you grab this, and then you stick your ratchet in the spot for the nut, and then that will bring your tension, and you can do that. Let's see if we can set this up good enough to show you how to do this. Alright, so other than dropping the camera, so now your belt is set. So now you can pull this back off here. And now this is going to stay fixed in place. You can grab your clutch fan and put it on here beforehand, and use your belt tension to be able to tighten all your nuts without it free spinning. So I'll just get that set up and tightened up. Pretty straightforward. Alright, next you put in your radiator. This is a coil rad. Still has the factory shroud and everything put in, and the overflow. So you just pretty much drop it in, and don't mess up your fan. There's still a little bit of coolant left in it, but you just want to make sure that you get it in the little holes on the bottom. So without sitting in the puddle, you see here, you kind of pull that side in, and then the other side. And then your radiator's in, so then you come back to the top. You have your bracket for each side. and then you grab your bolts. Alright, so when you get your bolts started, pull the radiator in place, get her snugged up. Then there's a lower shroud portion that goes on the bottom of the fan, and that all just clips in, and then uses these little metal clips on the side as well that you have to slide over. Alright, so radiator setup is on, hose is on, and lower shroud. So now we can move on to our hot side. It's a Superstore manifold for a T51R, but it's not really the greatest. We had to add our different wastegate tube with a turbo smart wastegate because we had a V60 on it and it ended up breaking. So we needed something that could be tied in better. So this drops in pretty easily. I need a second hand setup. Set up the camera here. The wastegate makes it a little more difficult, but it does indeed fit. Then you get your nuts and just start threading them on. And I usually do these similar to the head, where you start from the middle and work your way out, just because these flanges aren't very straight in case they warp due to heat when they're making them, or just from driving. They do take quite a bit of heat. And these are all 14mm nuts. You can get to most of them with a ratchet, I think, except for one of them. And that's pretty much it for this. See, the wastegate clearance is pretty close to the frame rail. And then there's just the intercooler left, really, but we can show that when we go to put on the turbo, because there's going to be our HG intercooler pipes, so we can show you how to put those on. It's really simple, it just kind of clips on. So this is pretty much it for this video. Once we get this tightened up, just a basic assembly of a 2J going into a Chaser. You can see the whole base starting to fill up and get all tucked up. So yeah, we'll be tuning in for the next one. Hopefully our turbo comes back from rebuild by next week, and we can get a first start on this and show you how to prime the oiling system and set it up on these linkies here.